From emotes being very mean to reverting everything with the color green, Marvel Snap players are passionate about a lot of things, but the number one thing they're passionate about is yelling on the internet. This is Marvel Snap Hot Takes. Now, before we get started, a quick reminder that I am contracted to Second Dinner, and importantly, these opinions do not represent them at all. These are my opinions on the game. They are not official. Do not attribute them to anyone but me. We need some reverts. Shang-Chi, Loki, Arishem. When move is the meta, it's not fun. I think you see a lot of takes like these from players who were particularly attached to certain old metagames. Maybe they liked playing in them. Maybe they were more successful in them and aren't really feeling the same way about current things. Or alternatively, you see them from players who've been playing for a long time and have experienced a lot of the things the game has to offer and would like to go back to something that's incredibly high octane. Because the three cards listed here are very high octane. Loki is crazy. Arishem is crazy. Shang-Chi, I think they actually could get away with, but I'm not sure it'd be good for the game if they tried to. I will say this, of the three, the one that seems the most objectionable to me is Arishem. Arishem is already a pretty good deck. I don't really see a justification for improving it in a meaningful way, where Loki and Shang-Chi are just much generally worse cards that I think you could honestly try to improve, but they both run into the question of, would it make the game better if we brought this card into a higher level of prominence in the metagame? With Loki, I think the answer is probably not. I think that play pattern would get old very fast. Like, accepting that a lot of play patterns that people like at one point get old after a month of that play pattern being around, I do think Loki would uniquely get old pretty fast. And I think that people have demonstrated a pretty clear aversion to having their stuff unilaterally blown up by their opponent. You'll see how many times Gambit shows up on these takes that I don't think Shang-Chi would be a worthy revert. So while I respect the place this is coming from, I think the specific choices they have selected are not perhaps optimal. People would have more fun if they brewed more of their own decks. I climb with the decks you post, then take those shells and brew based on your meta-analysis, i.e. the Kang Loki deck was mega fun, but TOV started feeling bad, so poof, it's different now, and I'm having a blast. I think that it's probably true that people would have more fun if they dove into this game more, but that's not something that's available to everybody. And while I think that the best way for a good player to use my tier lists is not to play the decks on the tier lists, but to use that as an example of what they're trying to beat, I don't really think I can blame anybody for using them to shortcut using my knowledge. I think that is part of the utility that I provide. Here's what I know about this deck. Here's what I can tell you about how to play it. How can I help you get better without you having to put in the reps? A lot of the time, getting good at a card game is about reps to gain knowledge, and I am here to help shortcut some of that for people. And if they want to have that shortcut available to them, I don't think less of them for doing that, because it's what I do every time I run into a thing I'm stuck in on a video game. You know I'm Googling guides. You know I'm looking up that stuff. You know I'm looking for meta decks. I'm stuck. I'm losing. Losing sucks. And some people are just wired like that. And I think that that is definitely a valid way of approaching it. And I think maybe if you're higher investment, maybe it makes more sense to be like, okay, I know all the stuff KM is saying. I've had the same experiences myself, and I'm going to use that experience and then my own game knowledge to analyze what KM has described as the metagame and figure out what matches up well into it. And I think there's a lot to be said for doing that, but I also think that's like a relatively high investment level kind of thing to even think to do in the first place. And a lot of people who play this game are lower investment, and for those people, I do think, it's probably going to be more bang for your buck to just play a good deck. Playing Gambit Horseman is a net negative to personal skill progression in this game. I've had so many high infinite games where the opponent isn't paying attention to the locations, where and how they are playing, or my side of the field. They're solely focused on duping Gambits. I could not disagree with this more, actually. I think that if anything is deleterious to your personal skill progression in playing the game, it's you choosing to play decks that lose despite knowing that other people are doing this. The biggest thing you can do to get better at this game is stop stigmatizing people who do X. It is the number one biggest thing you can do, because you're going to be in a metagame at some point where you're going to have to do that thing. And then if you can't bring yourself to make a smart choice because you spent all this time talking about how unskillful this deck was, you're going to be leaving money on the table. It's as simple as that. I do not think that the deck choice you make makes you unskillful. I think other people being unwilling to make those choices. Deck selection is a part of skill. If you are out there recognizing that this deck is particularly strong, like if we accept all the premises of this deck is so good, it doesn't even have to think, it's amazing, you should be playing it. If all of that is true, you should be playing this deck because you don't have to think while playing it. There's a bunch of free wins in there, and it's apparently super busted. Go play it. You're leaving money on the table not playing it. And I think that it's actually way more harmful to your development as a player to say, I will never do this, to never experience playing like that. Because if you don't actually play those decks, you won't understand what it looks like when they don't work, and you won't know how to beat them in those ways. And I think that that's just I think that the mindset here that bothers me is actually the one that you have here, which is to say, this deck, it sucks, it's unfair, it's OP. If that's true, that's one thing. But you have to at least accept that if there's an OP deck out there and you're choosing not to play it, some of that is on you. You have to take a little bit of responsibility for the choice you're making here. And I think I see a lot of things like, RSM gamers, Hella gamers. I don't like Hella, but I don't feel anything negative about people who play Hella. It's totally valid. And I think that you're going to learn a lot of things about Marvel Snap that other people might not necessarily know from playing a lot of Hella. And I think that the degree to which these things are going to hold you back by being too good, I think it's actually the opposite. I think that playing a really strong, really linear, really straightforward deck and taking all the weight off of your so you can think about more macro meta things during the game, I think that's actually one of the easiest ways to get better. I think the actual easiest way to get better at this game is to play an easy busted deck. And then because you're playing an easy busted deck, you're winning a lot, which means you can actually learn. One of the biggest barriers to people learning is that it involves a lot of losing. And if you're playing an easy busted deck, you can lose while winning, or you can win while losing or playing badly, and then identify some of those things. And there are definitely like downsides to that, right? Like maybe you won't ever identify your misplay because your deck is so good or whatever, right? But if it's that busted, it'll probably get nerfed in 3 to 5 weeks anyway, and then you'll have to figure out what you're doing. But while you were doing that, you got into a skill cohort that was above your own, right? Like that's how ladders function. You played this busted deck to a level where you're playing better players now. And that's where you start learning. Like that's how you learn in a ladder context, is you play a deck that gets you above your actual skill level. And then when you're above your actual skill level, you fight really hard to stay there. You try to scrape your way. You don't want to go down anymore. You stay there, right? And then as you learn from the better players that you're playing against, you actually become one of the people who belongs there. And I think that's actually like the best thing people can do to get better at this game. Mobius should be symmetrical. What do you mean you get a bunch of discounted stuff and I can't? Normally these are like, oh, I'm going to yell about this for 2 to 5 minutes. This one's going to take 30 seconds. I fundamentally agree. This is a good take. It is a correct take. There is not a good reason why Mobius is beneficial for me and also bad for my opponent when it's been 3 years of us understanding that this card is really, really good. I understand that when you release a card like this, maybe you want to make sure that it actually makes it in decks, but this card has been out and around for 3 years. It's okay. We do not need to have this additional line of text on Mobius. He could just say, card costs can't be changed this game. What are the odds for a new free-to-play player in Marvel Snap to ever be competitive with the big amount of new cards released? I think as the time goes on, the game will struggle to bring new players in. I had 2 years off, and I used to buy all the season passes and still can't keep up. I think it sort of depends on what you mean. Like, there are two things happening here, right? Competitive and keeping up. I don't don't think you're going to keep up without spending money, because in order to keep up, you have to get to the place first, right? And Marvel Snap releases enough cards that you're probably going to want to spend money if your goal is to have every card in the game, right? If that's how you define keeping up, which, to be clear, no other card game defines keeping up that way, but if that's how you define keeping up, that's one thing. The second thing, though, is I do think that you can be competitive as a free-to-play player. I'm not sure exactly how fast, but I strongly suspect that with some smart decision-making, you can have the super giant Wilson Fisk and either Ronan or Ozymandias top end pretty quickly. I strongly suspect that you can put together a decent Thanos Arishem deck pretty quickly. I don't necessarily have hard data on that, but every time basically like oh, I'm in the middle of series 3, what should I play, KM? The answer I've given is pretty much always Supergiant, because most of that deck is series 3. And so you are able to like very reasonably put together a deck that is and has been one of the best decks in the game. Like, it is unbelievable how powerful Supergiant is. It won the last 2 Golden Gauntlets. Come on, guys. It's a really strong deck for a really low price. It is the number one way for someone who, I don't have all the cards, but I want to play a competitive deck. I don't even have many of the cards, but I want to play a competitive deck. Supergiant decks are going to get you there. Like, it is actually that simple. There are so many cards that are so powerful in that context, and so many of them are series 3. It is the easiest answer to any question like this. That is just a straight up elite deck that is mostly series 3. For the first of our Discord submissions, releasing a new season with new cards which feels subpar to play with because old decks and old meta is better is not fun for the first 2 weeks of a new season. I agree with that. In this specific Spider-Man season, I feel move decks are indeed really fun to play with, but they're countered by Gambit HOD if they don't play Prof X. Not sure I agree with that because I don't think the Prof X is very good, but I do agree they're countered by Gambit HOD. A more frequent update on more impactful OTAs would fix this state of the game, and the latest OTAs were massively amiss. This is the part that I disagree with. I can agree on the premises here. You know, there's a lot of Spider-Man stuff running around that Gambit's beaten. But I don't necessarily think that that's an argument for nerfing Gambit. And I think if you proposed that as the developers of this game, we're going to nerf Gambit so that you have to, like, so that the cards we're selling you now are good, I think that sets a horrible precedent. Like, effectively, what you're suggesting is the cards we sold you 2 months ago are beating the cards that we're selling you now. So we're going to nerf the cards that we sold you 2 months ago. And then in 2 months, when the cards that we sell you now are beating the cards that we're selling in 2 months, we're going to nerf the cards that we sold you now. I don't think that's a good precedent set. I think that is a deeply unhealthy thing to do for the future of the game. And as much as it may be true that Gambit Horseman of Death is holding these decks back, I don't necessarily think that that justifies doing something that, to my mind, is that level of anti-consumer. If Gambit Horseman is too strong, and I think he is, nerf him on the basis of him being too strong. But if Gambit Horseman is not necessarily too strong, but it's really good against the Season Pass card, I think it sucks if you're nerfing a card that people paid for that reason. I think it sucks. So I do think that this is a question of like data, and obviously we don't get internal data, so I don't really know. But I do think that like if I were in charge of this decision, which I am not anywhere near it, I would only nerf Gambit if he was actually too strong. And if it was just a question of him holding back the Season Pass stuff, I don't think it's good to take that kind of stuff into account. I think that when you introduce a financial incentive into OTAs and stuff like that, that's not really a bridge you can uncross. And I think that this would be doing that. The X23 and Colleen nerfs were not just bad, but also bad for new players. New players love playing synergy packages. The nerfs took cards that were already on the fringe competitively and also pushed them to the fringe at lower level play. This is another one where I could talk for any amount of time on this, but we're going to save time and just say I 100% agree. Colleen Wing should be a 2/4 again. X23 should at least be a 1/2. And frankly, if I were going to pitch an X23 change, what I would do is I would have her gain 1 power every time she's destroyed as well. I think that would be a totally fine thing to do. I would be super happy with that card. It would be awesome, exciting, and fun. And I have absolutely no objections to even a nerf, a buff of that magnitude to a card like X23, who is awesome, cool, evocative, and frankly, pretty underpowered at 1/1. Marvel Snap is a mobile game, so it needs to act like one. No matter how much better the game gets, most people will distrust the quality of a game with a 3.3 rating on the App Store. Every time someone opens a Series 5 pack and gets an extra Series 5 card or 5,000 tokens, they should have a pop-up to rate the game. Also, when new players get the Thanos deck, or when a player hits Infinite for the first time, getting that rating above 4 would be worth some minor annoyance. They should hire this guy. That's actually crazy. I am not a pop-up enjoyer. I do not enjoy when I am told things like go buy on the web shop. I already do. Like, what do you I get it, but like chill. Like I really personally dislike those because I think my experience of Marvel Snap has always been a straightforward one, which is it's an app with a button that says play, and then that's how I interact with it. And so stuff like that disrupts it. But I really do think it's clever to just be like, yo, I'm going to put these when something good happens to you. Like that is really funny. I don't know how much any of that stuff is worth, to be clear. My instinct is that the fewer pop-ups, the better. But that is like a pretty smart way of going about it, because right now it does sort of feel like I'm getting pop-up scattershot. Like, last chance, here's this. I'll also say this. The pop-ups aren't that bad on Steam, which is like the client that I stream on. But on mobile, I find the pop-ups like meaningfully worse. And I think maybe if they were able to find a way to make them less like that, I would be in favor of it. I'll say that much. Hazmat nerf was lame. Hazmat should never have been nerfed. The card was good when it was nerfed because Afflict had a good matchup into Thanos. The second Thanos got effectively nerfed, Afflict would not have been as good. Hazmat was just a good answer to the metagame at the time. Their reasoning on the nerf as well was lame. They said they did it from a design space perspective, but hardly any Afflict cards have been added since Hazmat got nerfed, and none of them seem like they'd be game-breaking with 2-cost Hazmat. I think that's two different things. Doing it from a design space perspective, I think, is not necessarily saying we're gonna print this stuff. I think what they did was correctly identify that Hazmat is a design space constraint, and then didn't change her enough for her not to be that. Because fundamentally, the design space that Hazmat is constraining is, I am a card that works with Ajax. There are 0 cards in the game that you could possibly make that do more for Ajax than Hazmat. None. You could not make a card that does more for Ajax than Hazmat. You could not make a card that does more for Diamondback than Hazmat. You could not make a card that does more for anything that scales with the number of afflicts than Hazmat. You can't do it. It's impossible. And that is ultimately the issue Hazmat has, is that it doesn't matter what she costs 2 or 3. It's the same as Luke Cage. She's the exact inverse. Her portfolio is too big. Every scaler you'd want to make in this quote-unquote archetype would scale with numbers. This is why I think, by the way, that the Scorpion Brand New Day card is scaling with volume of afflict, so that it's not just a Hazmat bot. But it's still going to be really good with Hazmat because she's just really good at making numbers happen, right? And so, like, there's only so much you can do to change that, because they didn't actually fix the design space problem with Hazmat by making her more expensive. The design space problem with Hazmat is her text. Maybe if they made her way more expensive, that wouldn't necessarily be an issue. But right now, she's a cheap card that gets you way more than any other Afflict card at that cost. Way, 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 way more. Hazmat is better to play with Ajax than multiple, if not all, 4-drops in the Afflict deck. That's messed up. And that was true when she was a 2. So they correctly identified this is messed up design space, but then they changed it by making it more expensive instead of actually fixing the design space. And I don't think they made it expensive enough to actually balance what she was doing, which is a normal thing to do. You're like, okay, well, we're going to take this to 3. Surely that would actually, work, right? But I don't necessarily think that it did. And I think they're in the exact same position where it's like, when you actually look at what Hazmat does, and then you look at like Spider-Woman or Man-Thing, or really any of them, right? You're like, why would I do any of this stuff if I could play a Hazmat? Like, go up the curve. If Hazmat was a 4-7, it'd be better than Man-Thing. If Hazmat was a 4-5, it would still be better than Man-Thing, right? Like, you just end up with this thing where it's like, this is the archetype's card. It is the only thing that this archetype does. And it's the only thing this archetype cares about. And it's a very weird space for them to be in. I do think there's a design space issue with Hazmat. I just think that they didn't fix it. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal. And one final reminder that these opinions are mine and do not represent any opinions of Second Dinner. Thanks.